Very good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the UN Science Policy Business Forum, Stockholm Plus 50 edition. My name is Axel Threlfall. I'm with Reuters out of London. It's a cozier gathering today, so if you feel you want to move forward, do move forward. Hopefully there will be people coming in shortly from a very rainy street outside. We've got another fantastic day lined up for you today. Sector transitions and creating impact, from pledges to action on the road to the next climate COP. Later on this afternoon in the theatre just across the way there, we're going to host a mini TED-style closing with leaders who are going to share their vision and inspiration for Stockholm Plus 100. And shaping our common future. After that, we're going to head, as I said yesterday, into the gardens, the Kunstgarten, to unveil the Transformers exhibition, the 50 by 50 legacy digital art for Stockholm Plus 50. We're also going to enjoy the Concert for Peace and the Planet by double Grammy-winning composer Ricky Kedge and presented by Ellie Goulding. And I am assured the sun is going to be shining a little bit later on. Just a very quick word on what we heard yesterday. I don't want to spend too long on this before we start. But some of the perspectives shared point very clearly to the urgent need to deploy and finance the best technologies to power this transition. A more effective multilateral system requiring greater collaboration across sectors. We concluded that accountability, transparency, and access to data and knowledge are, of course, essential to the success of the multilateral system and multi-sectoral collaboration. The need to create demand for sustainable products and to grow and finance green technology markets, et cetera, et cetera. It was a super day of panels, and I think we got a lot out of it. Just before I hand to the first session, which will be nature-positive sector transitions and the need to double the speed of progress, I would first, though, like to give the floor to Sonja Layton-Cohn. Sonja is Acting Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme. Sonja, come on up.
Excellencies, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm pleased to welcome you to the start of a new beginning of our deliberations today. Our discussions yesterday made it clear that the multilateral system must evolve now in a direction where we put the science into action and empower society to have access to the latest green technologies that have the potential to help humanity address the planetary crisis without leaving anyone behind. We have all the multilateral tools that we require to act, the voluntary and legally binding agreements that have been made over a number of years. The world needs to do much better to bridge the gap between knowledge and tools and actual implementation. Today, we will talk about transitions and transformations. Our conclusions will inform the echelons of decision-making across the UN, policy and industry. We have an exciting program and the opportunity to shape the future. So let us begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sonja. Right, let's start today's session with a vision setting on nature-positive sector transitions and the need to double the speed of progress. We heard from Harry Verhaar yesterday. He's going to lead this session. Harry is Head of Global Government and Public Affairs at Signify and founding member of the UN Science Policy Business Forum. He's also chair of the European Alliance to Save Energy. Come on up, Harry. The floor is yours, and then we'll throw a few questions at him after we've heard from him. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Axel. So is it working? Yeah, it's working. Yeah, so Shireen asked me also when preparing for this summit what are really important subjects. And what you see, and we saw that in Glasgow, is that we're finally moving from the question, why and what needs to be done, to how to do this and to advance the speed of action. And in that sense, we have a long experience in the lighting sector, so it will not have gone unnoticed to all of you. But it also shows then that if you go from the one technology to the other, which is more climate friendly, it's not like flipping a switch, and not even for lighting. This was like flipping a switch, and so that's why in a minute or 8 that I've got, I wanted to share some of our experience. It's important to start with the fact that I came back end of 2003, actually, from living 5 years and working for 5 years in Latin America as a marketing manager for Europe, for what we call our professional lighting, which is the biggest part of our business. So you have, let's say, lighting for residential, but then all professional applications, street lighting, retail, offices, industry, sports, not to forget. And question was there, what can we actually do in terms of marketing strategy to further improve the business? And we don't believe, also at that time, we didn't believe in just selling more stuff and doing discounting campaigns and taking some share from somebody else, because the other day it would be the other way around. So we saw much more that actually more energy efficient solutions were penetrating in the market real slow, like many innovative solutions they have to cope with the lower initial price tag of all technology. That is quite a bit of a focus, not only of consumers, but also of public procurement. Looking at lowest initial cost, where actually we know that over lifetime we then pay the cost, we pay a higher cost, but also we don't enjoy the benefits of all those innovations. So what we did at the time, and it was also then when we saw the European Parliament was thinking about how do we translate the Kyoto Treaty into European regulation. And I felt we can do 2 things, and that is also when I brought the lighting industry together, so with GE, with Osram, with Sylvania and some others. And I said, we got 2 options. We can do nothing, we can hide and stay away and say, let's go to the other sector, go to the steel sector, go to the cement boys, or whatever, but we are fine. But then still you'll have regulation with a lot of bureaucracy, and this is not going to be helpful, not for anyone. So the other option we have is that we work together through the association on subjects that we are allowed to work together, and then building also a database on how much does lighting matter, what technology exists, what can happen, what is needed in regulation, and how much mitigation, how much carbon benefits can be obtained if regulation would be created to do that, to cut down on CO2 emissions. So that is what we did at the time. So this was like 2004, 5, 6 with the European Commission. The commissioner at the time for energy, I think, was one of the best the Commission ever had, was Anders Piebox, and he shaped the eco-design of energy-using product directive. And it's still very important today because it's being recast and now to become much broader and also take circularity into account. But at the time, so the eco-design directive was framed to advance more energy-efficient solutions. So the most important regulatory instrument that was created was minimum energy performance targets. Minimum energy performance standards, I should say, that's the official term. And that gradually then took into account that for every application segment, the older technology, initially in lighting, but also in white goods and computers, anything that had a plug and consumed electricity, would be within the scope of that regulation, and that's what happened. And that is also why you see how Europe is ahead of many other regions in that. We also felt that maybe one remark there, what you may not fully realize, of course, we all know the example of incandescent light bulb and compact fluorescent lamp, which is now already succeeded by LEDs, but every application segment had such an example. Actually, in Sweden, in street lighting was one of the countries that were most on old mercury lighting for street lighting, and you already had many more efficient solutions. Same for office lighting. I think you'll remember the thick fluorescent tubes with magnetic ballast. and actually had many more efficient solutions existing. In every segment, this was the case. So if you added all of that up, then the potential global savings are roughly 270 billion euro per year, and like 1,200 megatons of CO2, so mattering quite a bit. And at the time, also we shared all those data with the Commission. Lighting was 19%, almost 1/5 of global electricity consumption. It was the largest homogeneous sector that existed. So what happened is then, we also felt as a company, you need to walk the talk, you need to create milestones, and let's also show how you walk the talk. So in December 2006, I remember vividly, we organized an event in Brussels, and because of the unique nature, we got the European Parliament to do this, where we made a global call to phase out incandescent light bulbs. And I don't know if let's say, many of you remember, but this was world headline news. I had such a stack of newspaper clippings from all around the world, because this was really, it was unique, but it was also very symbolic, but also very necessary. Because if you realize, the incandescent light bulb was the first mass electric appliance ever. So when our grandparents or great-grandparents got electricity, there was nothing. There were no shavers, there were no blenders, there was no TV, there was no radio. The incandescent light bulb was really the first mass electric appliance. But also, in that sense, it was symbolic. But also, it turned only 1% of input energy, if you start from the utility, into light. So it was more like a heating device and not like lighting. But that's what it was. But also, it was two-thirds of our sales volume in 2006. Even then, like more than 100 years after we were founded in 1891. So in essence and implicitly at the time, we then called for we were world market leader, #1, we still are today, but then in essence, we called for the global phase out of all of our portfolio. And that was also the unique nature when you saw how the media and politics reflected on this. How can a company do this? How can they be so foresighted? And we felt that in this whole race, let's say not to save the planet, but to save humanity, and let's be honest on that, you need to be looking at how do we cannibalize our own portfolio? How do we transition to more, let's say, to more climate-friendly solutions? How do we go to carbon neutrality? We made a commitment in 2015 in Paris to become carbon neutral in 5 years, which we accomplished in September 2020. So all these things, I think, so for part, how do you shape the whole transition in your sector? And we'll have panels on fashion and on mining. But how do you shape this whole transition? How do you stay ahead? Because also one important factor that we saw is what did it do to competition? So I'll say a few words on, let's say, the global scope first. So we did this in Europe. And interestingly, I think also as you look at the difference between Europe and America, so Europeans quite often have the better ideas first, but then it takes a lot longer and much more discussions had to create regulation. And as in the US, not everybody reads the global news. We repeated this call to phase out incandescent light bulbs in March, on March 15, 2007 in Washington on the Hill. And it was actually a bipartisan event. And there we didn't talk much about climate, but we talked about energy independence, we talked about cost for consumers, and those kind of things. So that really stuck. And then in the US, they picked up the idea a little later, because it was March. But then already in December that year, lighting became a chapter of the Energy Independence and Security Act, signed by George Bush, so there was a Republican president, Nancy Pelosi, still around, and Robert Byrd, who was then chairing the Senate. I still have it stuck on the wall because they sent it to me. So there was also an interesting race between Europe and the US. How do we do this? But then next to the US, then actually all the OECD countries started doing this. Can you imagine in 2007 and 2008, I got calls like, this is the office of the Prime Minister of South Korea. We want to visit you and talk about lighting. Went to Australia, New Zealand. So all the OECD countries followed. And then, what was interesting, I think it was 2007 and 2008, we spoke with Achim Steiner, who was then heading UNEP, and his team, and said, okay, for all those emerging developing countries, this is even more important, because if you cannot afford, like I said yesterday, if you cannot afford energy saving, you certainly cannot afford the energy. So we also need to see how can we help emerging developing countries to make the same transition, and for part to leapfrog to more modern technologies, also looking at business models, how to finance and all those things to take away those hurdles. So this really became a global program. And you see today, so last year we did an update on the statistics. Lighting was down from 19 to 12% of electricity. And we see in 2030 it will be down to 8%. And of course, concurrently, that energy needs to become clean. And then we will have made this 1,200 megaton contribution to tackling climate and keeping us within what you could call livable boundaries. 1.5 C is not an objective, but it's like a livable boundary. So what I would like to share there also a few things on competition. You can see there also in sector transitions, and I think this is also useful for mining and for fashion to think about. What we also learned, it's not the large who eat the small, but it's the fast who eat the slow. We saw that at the time when we started this program, we were 3 companies more or less of the same size globally. Number 2, number 3, they went in the same direction but slower. And they're no longer around. So let's say big global brands no longer around in lighting. We are now 85% LED lighting and connected LED lighting, so providing all kinds of user benefits. And again, world leader. So I'm not saying this to, let's say, to do some chest thumping. We're not like that as Europeans, and certainly not as Dutch. But to show like it's quite unique, because you see other sectors had like, let's say Kodak or BlackBerry has. So then they were world market leaders, but then they were slower in the transition, and immediately, let's say, your survival as a company is at risk. What we also see there, and I think that is for the next 2 panels, is that an integrated approach is essential. So it's not just having portfolio. You need indeed the regulation, but also you need to look at your whole supply chain, so upstream and downstream. For us, this was a huge industrial transition. At the time in 2006 and 2007, we made a whole plan. So how do we actually globally phase out incandescent light bulbs? Because this was not just like putting some other products on the shelf and we're done with it. It also meant, how do we transition all those wattages? How do we make this understandable for consumers in retail and do-it-yourself outlets? And also there, we agreed with the European Commission that this would be a stepwise phase-out, which kicked in on the 1st of September 2009, 2010, 11, and 12. And then it went actually initially higher wattages, medium wattages, lower wattages, and then, let's say, the remainder part of the portfolio. And this was also really important, because that first step on 1st of September 2009 already meant that we had to reposition 25 kilometers of retail and DIY shelves. So there's also a capacity issue if you go through a transition. That's my message there. We also at the time had 14 factories worldwide that produced incandescent light bulbs. And we foresaw that within 8 years, we have to close 13 of those. So we also included restructuring, which was triple-digit millions of euros. So that was also part of the plan. So if you shy away from the industrial and restructuring implication, also we looked at people. How can we rescale people and all of that? So that is what I would call an integrated plan. So any advice from me to any other sector is also make this like an integrated approach. Then maybe then to end up, also given time, there's some learning. So I mentioned, so you really need to have a vision. So our vision had to do with, okay, what does this new lighting bring? And it was very early on that we advocated this would be a triple win. So a triple win for the quality of our living environments, an economical triple win, because you can imagine those 270 billion euro annual savings are divided over households, over cities. Half of a city's energy bill is lighting, street lighting, public office and schools, companies, retail. And thirdly, what I would call social people benefits. We see with the better lighting technology that nighttime traffic accidents can be reduced by 30%. I know Stockholm is considering then changing to LED street lighting. We see now from 10 cities around the world, has been a research from the World Council on City Data a couple of years ago, on Los Angeles, Buenos Aires, and a number of other cities, that nighttime traffic accidents, which is 40% of all traffic accidents, are reduced by 30%. Street crime, so assaults and burglary, reduced by 21%. And why is that, you would think? Because light is light and white is white. But in technical terms, with LED lighting, you have a better vertical recognition, which then means, in layman's terms, people make less mistakes, so fewer accidents, and they are less naughty, so less crime. And we see the same in fashion. So then also in fashion, we see that the good lighting makes let's say, all the garments stand much more beautiful. And also you can lead people through your shop. You can vary the lighting at home. I guess some of you, or maybe many of you, already have LED lighting at home. You can now even talk to it. You could say like romantic, or you could say party. And those things were unimaginable with old technology. So I would say also there, one lesson learned is let's look at the benefits of new technology. Same for electric driving. It doesn't smell and it doesn't make noise. So that's the second lesson. Work together as an industry sector. And I think the last thing that I would like to say is really think through, and I think all of us do it in a way, that you can also communicate to anyone else that the best way to serve any self-interest is to invest in the common interest. I think there, I mentioned yesterday, you know the concept win-win, lose-lose, and win-lose in the middle. If you go for win-lose, in the end, it will always end up in lose-lose. So that is also why we, and also UNEP, make such a big effort of bringing us all along and acting on the Paris Agreement. But I sincerely, deeply believe that we are best off if we jointly invest in the common interest. And that is what we try to do with lighting. There's still quite a bit of work to do, but I hope this is actually useful to you and also for the two next panel sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harry. I've got a couple of questions very quickly that I want to ask before we do the fashion panel. You talk about vision, of course, in the context of advancing globalization. What is the next big thing in lighting?
So there's two things. So like I mentioned, we are 85% LED, so you would say, well, all done. So let's go and look at other sectors. Lighting is done. But what is interesting to note is that also in Europe, where we work on the European Green Deal, still 2/3 of the install base is conventional lighting. And you see there also when you go through a transition, you need to look at not only, let's say, at what is done per year, electric car sales per year, LED sales per year, installed renewable power base per year, but also how do you address the install base? And this is also why it is so crucial in the European Green Deal, but also in Build Back Better in the US, in China, the 14th five-year plan, to see how do we at least double the rate of infrastructure renovation. Because this is actually what we need to address, this large installed base of old technology. Yep. And second, if you allow me, Axel, then what is even more exciting is that lighting has become digital. We also launched a technology called Li-Fi. You will be familiar with Wi-Fi, but that's in the radio broadband that you can communicate, but that's getting congested. There are lots of applications where people don't like Wi-Fi. You know, the Pentagon doesn't have Wi-Fi because people can snoop, let's say, on the radio waves. But Li-Fi is actually superimposed data on the light waves. And you can get like a tremendous amount more of data. We see now there's lots of applications where then light is used for communication, for autonomous driving, which is really super fast, as fast as light. In defense, in many other industrial applications, no interference. So those two things. Yep.
Very quick final point. You talk about the fast eating the slow. How much risk-taking is factored in, or should be factored into decision-making and strategy? I imagine a lot of smaller entrepreneurial businesses, a lot of the fast businesses need to take risks.
Yeah, I think the biggest risk is too low speed. We see that with climate. If we are too slow, we are going to have big problems. So the only risk is lack of speed. So the fact that we spoke out internationally on the need to phase out old lighting technology and erase our existing business actually made it, that was the commitment. So there was no way back. So I think also there, even internally, if some people were hesitant to think, hey, can this be done? And it was there. It was like, it was out there. This is what we were doing. And I think everybody is behind this. And also what we see in the lighting industry is that at every level, so junior until 2 years ago, new CFO, people want to work for us. So they think it's super exciting as a sector, but also a company that invests not only in its own results, but in, let's say, in our collective future. That's where we want to work. Good. So we see this people part as maybe even the most important.
Harry, appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Harry Verhaap. Okay, we're gonna move on to the fashion panel. Just before I do that, I was, as a loyal Reuters journalist, I was perusing the Reuters newswire last night, and this was a very timely report, and I'm sure all the panelists are aware of this one. A very timely report from the business of fashion released yesterday very quickly, I'm going to tell you what it said. The 30 largest listed fashion firms must do more to hit Paris Climate Accord targets and UN Sustainable Development Goals, although some are improving their social and environmental credentials. This is a quote from the sustainability chief at this publication. You've got some front runners making small steps of progress, but fundamentally the big picture is that the industry is wildly underperforming. That is the context that I'm going to leave you with, and I'm going to hand it over now to the capable hands of Shireen Zorba to run this panel. Thanks, Shireen.
A very timely quote. Thank you very much, Axel. He leaves us with that and a bit of a challenge. So this is an exciting panel. In fashion, we called it, turning the needle on the industry's planetary footprint. Please allow me to introduce and welcome my panel, and then I'll tell you a bit more. So Sendiso Khumalo. Sendiso is an award-winning fashion designer and entrepreneur from South Africa, please. We have Alexandre Capelli. He's Environmental Deputy Director of Louis Vuitton, Moët Hennessy, LVMH. Cecilia Branston. She's Head of Resources Use and Circular Impact, H&M. And remotely, we are joined all the way from the US at a rather uncomfortable hour with Kenneth Pucker, Sustainability and ESG Professor at Tufts University. Hi, Kenneth, how are you? Thank you for joining us. What time is it?
My pleasure.
What time is it?
It's too early, but I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for being there. We appreciate it. So let's tell a story here of where we are, and then we will talk to our wonderful panelists about where we want to be and where we are heading. So the fashion industry's value is estimated conservatively at $3 trillion US, which corresponds to 2% of GDP. Total export of clothing is $1.29 trillion annually. In the US alone, consumers spend nearly $380 billion on apparel and footwear every year. The industry, which encompasses everything from textile and apparel brands to wholesalers, importers, and retailers, employs more than 70 million workers globally. 75% of them are women. The fashion industry continues to have positive growth, and the Asian market is forecast to have 38% share of global apparel demand in the past years. Now, let's just have a very quick look at the environmental footprint. The fashion industry produces about 10% of annual carbon emissions, which is more than all maritime shipping and international flights combined. Emissions are projected to grow by more than 50% by 2030, and according to the UN Environment Programme, a staggering 3,781 liters of water is required to manufacture a single pair of jeans. So this gives us an idea that consumerism and fast fashion and the practices of the past years have definitely had their impact in so many different ways, from production to consuming these products to transport and so on. The good news is the industry is transitioning very seriously towards a greener, more sustainable path. The question is the transition impactful enough, fast enough, and ambitious enough? To learn more and to better understand the parameters and conditions that could empower this transition and create more nature-positive and circular approaches, as well as a better equity within these sectors, we are very happy to have this panel today who will tell us so much more about what they are doing already, and then where they want to go with this, and how much these efforts would pay off in the future. I'll start actually with Sendiso Khumalo. You are based in Cape Town with a passion for modern and sustainable clothing with an emphasis on African heritage. You won the LVMH award, and you've been motivated to bring values of social equality, female empowerment into your brand. You work with small workshops, and your work was presented actually at the Museum of Modern Art in Denmark, the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art in Washington, at the Zeta Mecca Museum in Cape Town. So congratulations for all that, and please, Sindisu, tell me, what makes your products sustainable?
Thank you for having me. So essentially, for us, sustainability is sort of twofold. It's combination of environmental and social. You know, I really do believe that if you go into any impoverished area in the world, whether it's the slums of Mumbai or the squatter camps in Cape Town, you're going to see huge environmental problems within those areas. So for me, I feel like the two need to be approached together and like almost work quite symbiotically. And so I guess that's what we do with our products is we think about the what, which is the environmental, so how it's made, like what's inside the product, how it's made, is it cotton, is it organic cotton, is it hemp, how long does it take for the product to biodegrade, all of those sort of what questions. And then there's the who, which is the social impact side. So it's who are we working with, are people who are making our clothes being paid a living wage, which workshops are we working with, which programs are we bringing in. So the two kind of work intertwined, and I feel like if you bring your value system, we try to bring our value system into every single product because that's really the only way we're going to make any real impact or change.
How do you describe your business? Would you describe it as a startup? Would you describe it as something bigger? Or
Good question. I think I was telling somebody I've been an emerging fashion designer for 10 years. So
that's a long time.
Yeah. So no, we've been going for 10 years now, but I think. Fashion is one of those industries where it does take time to also find like your voice and what you're really trying to speak about. I mean, I do feel like, yeah, I'd say we're kind of just leaving startup phase and maybe, moving into kind of being a more kind of like, I guess, emerging brand. I mean, that's how it is.
The reason I'm asking that, I wanted to know, do you feel empowered going the path of sustainability at this size? The policies are in place, the incentives are in place to empower you to move forward, or did you find the sustainability path to be a bit of a struggle? It's a choice you made.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I definitely found the sustainability part to be a huge, it is a struggle, especially if you're in the southernmost part of Africa. Just even sourcing becomes its own, a lot of the sustainable factories that you'd want to work with or material sourcing would all happen essentially in Europe. So yeah, I think definitely on that side. But I guess on the flip side, when it comes to kind of the social development side of things, I live in South Africa. So it's to work and find partners to bring up social upliftment. So I think, yeah, but I do think so, like sustainability is a challenge for a reason. Like, we've gotten this far and we've destroyed the world this far. I think there needs to be like a pullback, it can't just be super easy to do it. But I think it's also like part of the challenge is also the joy and the beauty and the design. So I think the challenge is a good thing. I think the challenge allows you to explore and really be very critical about what you're bringing out. And essentially because we don't need as many clothes as we make on the planet. So, there's also that question consistently is like, is it even necessary, having all these clothes? So, yeah.
I'll come back to that point, but let me go to LVMH for a second and ask, what made her the first choice as the winner of that fashion award, sustainability award? I wanted to know what made you choose her business as the winner of that award for sustainability.
Yeah, we have an image prize dedicated to young designers for now a few years. And at the beginning, the criteria was mainly focusing on creativity because it's all about creativity in fashion mainly. But now for for, I would say, a few years. We are also focusing on sustainability. It's really part of our criteria, both social and environmental. And yes, Indizo, I guess, is one of the most successful on mixing creativity and sustainability, yes. Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. So now moving from the emerging industries from Africa to LVMH, you are on top, basically, of the value chain when it comes to the fashion industry. And your brand includes enormous luxury brands like Louis Vuitton, Christian Dior, Givenchy. The company has a market value of $194 billion and assets of more than 108 billion, making it the 73rd largest publicly traded organization in the world. That's a massive business. Now, with that and being on top of that chain, how do you, as a luxury brand, approach sustainability and circularity? And is it a struggle for you?
Yeah, it's a challenge now. At LVMH, it's a long-standing commitment. The environmental department was created in 1992. I went not there, but it's a long-standing commitment. And now the idea is to how can we transition for a basic productive business model to a more circular and regenerative. I will be honest, it's not that easy. And thank you for the ranking introduction of the business of fashion. So we are working on it. We have a new strategy called Life 360. And quickly, it's based upon 4 main pillars to accelerate the transition. The first one is circular creativity. And we have the challenge that all our products will result from eco-design by 2030. And what does it mean for fashion? For instance, we have set the following criteria. It means that at least 50% of the content will be either certified or from regenerative agriculture or recycled. We will need to have traceability, country of origin of the main raw materials, and also something about the end of life of product. Recycling, upcycling, so how can we manage the end of life of the product? Then we have a second target we want to fade out virgin oil-based plastic in packaging for all our packaging by 2026. Quite challenging, especially for perfume and cosmetics. Not that much in fashion, we should be there. And the last point is to accelerate in terms of what we call new circular services. So it's about renting, second-hand, repair services. So now all our brands are offering repair services. Our second pillar is traceability transparency. So being able to trace all our raw material until the field. And it's quite challenging, you know. Of course, we'll know our tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, but cotton, wool, leather, they are sometimes tier 4, tier 5, or even tier 6 suppliers. So we have the challenge to be able to trace the whole supply chain. And then transparency to customer, being able to share the environmental and social performance with our customer. Of course, we have the upcoming regulation in France, but also in Europe. But we want to anticipate this kind of regulation worldwide and to share this information with our customers. So we are now step by step implementing tools to calculate the environmental impact of our product and sharing with our customer. Of course, climate. We do have a climate trajectory approved by SBTi, nothing new now. We all have that in the industry. And the last but not least pillar is really biodiversity, which for us is really the key pillar. And for what does it mean for us? It means ensuring that all of our raw materials in fashion, but not only in fashion, for fashion it's cotton, wool, leather, we have many, many different raw materials, will be certified. We are almost there. Then implementing regenerative agriculture. I know it's a trendy topic right now, regenerative practices, but we are starting to implement regenerative practices and talking about accelerating and doubling the speed of progress. I think that this topic of regenerative agriculture is really key for us. So we have started some projects, for instance, cotton in Turkey. We also have wool in South Africa or in Australia. And the last topic is fighting deforestation, achieving a zero net deforestation by 2026 and zero growth by 2030. And for fashion, it's mainly leather. We also have topics of palm oil and paper and wood base, but it's not less for fashion, it's more for packaging.
Let me ask you this. To what extent is the consumer driving your efforts to green?
They are really key, you know. And before consumer, I would say education. At the beginning, we really need to educate first the youth, but also our customers. And to do that, it's all about the environmental performance that we want to share with our customers. So for me, it will be the really super powerful next step to share this information with customers. You know, we all have this A to E labeling on electronics, on other type of products, and soon on fashion. And I think it will be a very powerful lever to inform and to educate the customer. So yes, definitely.
Thank you very much for that, Alexandra. I'll come back to you, but now I want to go to Cecilia. H&M is a leading high street fashion brand and a member of the Race to Zero initiative. And your ambition is to be net zero by 2050, I understand? No?
I'll tell you.
You will tell me.
I'll tell you all.
Tell me about what you're doing.
Absolutely. No, but I actually agree with the opening. It's going too slow, and we do have a big footprint, and we have to act, and we have to act now. I think the world is far from reaching the 1.5-degree target, and I think the fashion industry has to do its part. The H&M group that I'm representing has to do its part. So I'm fully convinced of that. I think we believe in the H&M group that a sustainable business is what will make us a resilient and future-proof and customer-oriented business going forward. And actually, yes, we're big, but that could also be turned into a possibility and an opportunity, I think, because the impact that we can create for ourselves and for our value chain can actually have an impact on the whole industry. So I think we should really grasp that opportunity and put commitments in place and act. So that's what we're focusing on. And when it comes to then our climate targets that you mentioned, we have actually set out a quite ambitious ambition while we're doubling our sales to 2030, we will at least halve our emissions by 2030. And we are aligning with science and the net zero standards. So the real kind of SBTi application goal that we have is to reduce our emissions throughout the full value chain by 56% by 2030. And also then achieving net zero 2040. So that's actually 10 years ahead. And we will also then have 10% carbon removals included in that. So yeah, we have a challenge there, of course, but focusing on energy efficiency, renewable energy, of course, and our circular agenda, recycled materials. And you mentioned biodiversity, and I can see we have very similar focus areas, I would say. But on the biodiversity side, we have an ambition to have a net positive impact on biodiversity through preventing and reducing our impact through regenerative, as you said, through our circular agenda and our goals on raw materials, but also protecting and restoring.
Let me go to measurement for a second, and it's a question for the three of you, really. How do you measure your success, and to what extent are there standards that are applied across the industry?
Yeah, no, but I think it's good to align with this, for example, Science-Based Target Initiative and the Net Zero Standard, because then we all do it in the same way, so to say. So therefore, on the biodiversity side, of course, we are awaiting the global goals on biodiversity. It hopefully will come this fall. But already now we're starting to apply, for example, the SBTN method in order to kind of reduce our impact and do it in a similar way. And standards, of course, can also be standards on, for transparency, for example, we're very much involved in the HIG Index and the Sustainable Apparel Coalition HIG Index, where we are also working with transparency, both kind of on us as a brand, our supply chain, but also towards the customers on our products. That's two examples. You want to continue?
Yeah, how do we measure? Of course, we have a classical reporting system for our own operation, but more and more, we are consolidating figures from our supply chain. We are now implementing some traceability tool which allows us to consolidate environmental figures from the whole supply chain, and it really helps us to evaluate the environmental footprint of our global value chain. For instance, again, focusing on biodiversity, we have implemented two different methodologies. The first one is the global biodiversity indicators, which allow us to, to measure the global biodiversity pin of our value chain. And the second one, we have implemented a dedicated life cycle analysis using the Impact Plus methodology. I'm sorry for the scientific details, but yes, we tried to measure very sharply our environmental impact. But the main topic, the main stake is being able to get the figure from our supply chain. So being able to consolidate figures from the farmers, from the suppliers, from the manufacturers. So this is the first challenge. And then, of course, we have tools to measure and to monitor our progress.
Maybe Sandy, so I mean, 10 years on the market already. Do you find that perhaps I'm African, I'm from North Africa. So in our part of the world, do you feel that it's different, or do you feel that we are on the same path in terms of our measurements and our targets?
No,
and maybe our impact, our footprint
I think definitely
is different.
it is. It's definitely more of a challenge in Africa because we have the challenge of like the social inequalities that exist. So, you know, it's really difficult to try to explain to somebody how important it is for us to save the planet when they're just trying to like get food on the table. So I think it's just we're not playing on the same playing fields. And I think that's why the challenge of communicating it in a different way and actually trying to make people understand that they are also stakeholders in how we treat the planet. But it is definitely more of a challenge in Africa.
So a last question to the panel before I move to Kenneth for his commentary from maybe a more kind of, you know, the knowledge side or the academic side. But I want to know, what is next? And are we moving at the right speed? And then finally, what is your biggest challenge that maybe through policy it could be better or it could be resolved? So Cecilia, let me start with you.
Yes, and of course I want to mention, like I'm head of resources and circular impact, so I have to say, of course, for me, circularity is a key tool. Optimizing resources, reducing resource use, eliminating waste and pollution, and make sure that products and material can circulate. I think that's key in order to be able to mitigate the challenge on biodiversity and climate, for example. So I think for us, looking at how we can create products that are designed for circularity, we have a goal there to do that by 2025, moving from conventional material to recycled and sustainably sourced. We have a goal to have 100% recycled or sustainably sourced material 2030 and at least 30% recycled materials 2025. So, and last year we actually tripled the amount of recycled materials in our products. But also I would say reducing our packaging is one important focus area for us, but most importantly, scaling circular business models, making sure that products can be used for longer, used more, they can be repaired, reused, and finally recycled. And here we need incentives, we need policies, and we need systems, we need infrastructure to collect, sort, recycle. We need the customers on board. We need to, there's a lot of things that needs to happen because it's a systemic change which requires that the whole system is involved and acts.
Like if there is one policy that you feel this would be the most impactful, what would that be?
What should I pick? Should I pick the climate? Making sure that we can have power purchase agreements, for example, to increase the number of renewable energy sources, especially in our production market. That's a key focus. But otherwise, I would say incentivizing circular business models and secure that we have efficient sorting, collecting, and recycling systems.
A final one for you, but I have to ask. Being a global business, I think some of us will have H&M in each of our rooms or something. Our children are wearing them and all that. But as a global business, do you find that the policy component might differ from one country to the other, how you need to comply, and to what extent is that a challenge?
Yeah, no, but it does. And I think we're more and more involved, both on an EU level, but also on a local level in our sales and production markets, for example. But of course, a harmonized legislation would make things a lot easier for us. So of course, we like looking at the EU agenda, for example, we're very much involved. I have my colleagues in the audience here. They know this area much better than me. But I think a harmonized approach, of course, is good. But I also see a change actually when it comes to policy and legislation, that they're pushing us a lot more now. So before the brands like us, of course, we could run ahead, but I think now the legislation is really pushing as well, which is positive.
I'll come now to you. Well, I can't claim that every house has a Givenchy or a Louis Vuitton or a Dior, but we wish. But you're lucky, right? You're really lucky when it comes to circularity, because in their case, they call it vintage, right? I'm wearing vintage, so circularity might be easier for you, I imagine. But tell me, so from your point of view, what are your biggest challenges, but what is also the way forward that could have an impact, and where is the role of policy from your kind of side of the industry?
Yeah. So do we go at the right pace? I would say yes and no. Yes, some of our targets will be achieved maybe sometimes in advance for packaging, for instance. But no, yes, I would say that what is missing, and I will come back to traceability, that to be sure that the whole value chain is going at the right pace, we need to identify each actor, each supplier, each farmer in our supply chain. And it's not that easy to do that worldwide. So for me, the main challenge is traceability. I know it's just a tool, but it will be a super powerful tool to be able to monitor and to challenge everything. But we are working on it. Then the second challenge is innovation. We rely on innovation to achieve our ambitious target, especially with regard to agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is this new trendy topic, but we will need innovation to accelerate on this topic of regenerative agriculture. What does it exactly mean for cotton? What does it exactly mean for wool, for silk? And again, we are working on it. And I would say education. I come back to education, but for me, it's really, really, really key. We won't achieve our target without education starting at the school. And then regulation. We need regulation. I'm French, so we really need regulation to achieve our targets. And I really rely on all the upcoming regulation in Europe, focusing on product environmental labeling. And I come back to that, sorry, but I think it will be super powerful to educate our customers and to accelerate the transition. And yes, as luxury brands, we are quite lucky because our products are already quite long-standing, with long-lasting product, high quality. So yes, for us, it's a plus. It's a kind of win. But, and we rely a lot on it. But yes, having said that, we need to inform the customer. It will be, for me, the main challenge in the next few years.
Thank you. And before I go to Ken for his kind of wrap-up, I will ask Cindy, so as a woman, as an African, as someone in the industry, to what extent being a sustainable business is opening doors, and to what extent it is not, both in the market, on the continent, but also maybe in Europe and outside?
I mean, I think essentially it is opening doors in terms of, I feel like the consumer is slowly beginning to understand that this isn't a quirky add-on to your brand, you know. So I think in terms of like building a customer base, I think it's like definitely opened a lot of doors. I think also I feel I'm part of a generation of, there's, you know, so many of us LVMH finalists are like sustainable designers. I think it's like it's something that we all feel, especially for our generation, is something that we need to take on board now. What was the second question?
In terms of laws and regulations and policies and financing, do you feel you have an edge when you are in the area of sustainability, especially on the continent, in your country, or not really? And what needs to change? If one or two things would change, what would those be?
No, not really at all. I mean, I think more than anything is just sort of like, I think Alexandra has touched on this, is just education from the beginning, like from school, from university. I think that's, for me, such a crucial part. I we were talking about my old university lecture. I learned about sustainability when I was doing my master's, you know, like 15 years ago. And then it was like this quirky. But, you know, for me, it was just like, I think education is probably the most important part of this entire conversation because, you know, getting everybody on board has to happen really from like, yeah, bottom grassroots level.
Including government.
Sorry?
Including government.
Including government, including educating governments, exactly, 100%.
Thank you so much. Ken, now I want to ask you the last open-ended question of this panel. I want to hear from you, your perspective. You have such a long history in the industry before, you know, also your work as, you know, in academia. But I want to hear your perspective about the transition in the fashion industry and whether it is happening fast enough, robustly enough to produce the desired impact. Over to you.
Thank you. The answer is unequivocally no. Interesting that we're here back in Stockholm because 50 years earlier, at the first UN conference related to the environment, there was a feeling that policy and regulation had a strong role to play in order to transition industry from the challenges that we were seeing environmentally to a sustainable path. And yet, by Brundtland, 15 years later, there was a commitment to sustainable development and more of a focus on corporate voluntary action as the solution to our environmental challenges. And yet, if you look where we are now, we have come through 25 years of reporting, first started with the GRI, and voluntary win-win solutions and measurement, and not much yield in terms of progress, at least from the fashion sector in terms of contribution to environmental stability. We now produce over 100 billion units of fashion annually. And per mention earlier, we need to cut our carbon footprint by 50% by the year 2030 to stay within 1.5 degrees Celsius, when in fact we're headed in the opposite direction. And so, though I appreciate genuinely the challenges that are ahead of all of us, the focus on things like regenerative agriculture and circularity are very nascent. While they have potential, they are less than 1%, represent less than 1% of the output of the industry. And so I do think we need a slightly different approach. The targets that we heard the panelists reference, things like science-based targets or the measurement tools we use like the Higg Index, I think are flawed. Science-based targets is terrific, but it's a voluntary approach. And the commitments that are being made don't come with consequence if they're missed. And in terms of the Higg Index, it actually biases the industry towards less regenerative, less circular solutions. It today rates polyester and other synthetic materials ahead of natural materials, which doesn't lead to a circular approach because, as we know, synthetics are not recyclable or upcyclable. And so I think we have built-in challenges, and we do need a different approach. I'm inspired by the earlier speaker from Signify who talked about the impact of policy on ridding the world of incandescent light bulbs. And I think there's analogy for fashion. I do think the industry as a whole could collectively move together on things like power purchase agreements and the like, if the regulatory environment were to shift. And so one illustration is outside the European theater, which is the leader in terms of regulation, but in the US, there's an approach in New York State, which is called the New York Fashion Act, which is trying to mandate the kind of transparency that Alexandra talked about through the tiers of supply chain. It's also trying to mandate that fashion companies adhere to science-based targets, and it does come with consequence for brands over $100 million of not adhering. I think that's an approach that will lift the floor for the industry and not just have a few leaders drive us with not enough followers, but instead mandate that we collectively as an industry move forward more aggressively.
Thank you very much, Ken. I would love to get your views on that, and I am told that our time is out. One sentence. Do you agree, disagree? What do you think? And I leave the session with the thought to be continued. This is such a fascinating topic, it's such an important topic, and I have a feeling we'll be doing more of that. But very quickly, your thoughts on what Ken said.
No, but there is this clear sense of urgency, but I do believe, maybe we don't share exactly the same views on synthetics, and I do believe they're cyclable and all of that, but in essence, we need speed, we need policy, we need change, and we need action now. So I fully agree with that. We will have different ways of getting there, but I would say, the conviction, the sense of urgency is there. I see a willingness in the industry to change. Collaboration will be key doing this, but also standardizations and science-based targets, I think.
I think this is very clear.
No, we are monitoring very closely this new New York regulation, and I think it's a very powerful regulation because coming back to traceability and transparency, it will boost transparency, and I think it will be key. At the corporate level, and again, sorry, but at the product level. So yes, I fully agree on this kind of regulation. It will help the whole industry. And then coming back to collaboration, yes, we do collaborate, even between luxury and fast fashion. We are discussing, and next week we have a very interesting meeting between us in Copenhagen to collaborate. So yes, and coming back to the less than 1%, I agree. On regenerative, but it's much more if we are coming back to organic or recycle. It's not only 1%, it's much, much more. But yes, regenerative, it's still just the beginning.
Cindy, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree, and I mainly really agree on the points of like collaboration and transparency. I think it's just crucial within the industry, but also within the players, within governments. Like there needs to be transparency from everyone. And some form of collaboration so you don't feel like you're doing this thing on your own, especially if you're like emerging like myself. But yeah, absolutely. I think the power of collaboration, and we were talking about this last night, the power of collaboration is really the way that we're going to fast track this process.
I am sure we will have so many comments and questions from the floor. However, we really don't have the time. So I do encourage you to meet the others, have a conversation, to be continued. So Cindy, Alexandre, Cecilia, and Ken, thank you for staying up so late. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll meet again. Thank you.
All right, this is always the hard part of my role, speeding things up when the content is so fascinating. But in the interest of clawing back a little bit of time, I'm going to keep this intro very brief and then get our speakers for the next session straight onto the stage. The extractive industries, this is what we're talking about now. Of course, are some of the headwaters of the global economy, sourcing fossil fuels, metals, minerals, used to fabricate the built environment, and consumables, and traditionally to power industry and transport. Of course, huge environmental costs along with the benefits, including water resource stresses, greenhouse gas emissions, habitat destruction, and ecosystem pollution. We are going to throw this around now over the next 30 minutes or so with Harry Fahar's context that he set in the back of our minds. Let me bring up our panelists. Stephen Kokoda, who we heard from yesterday, representing the copper sector and the industry. Sonja Layton-Cohn, who we heard from earlier today, Deputy Executive Director, UN Environment Programme. Welcome back to you, Sonja. Bruno Oberle, Director General of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and John Houchin, co-convener of the Investor Mining and Tailings Safety Initiative. Come on up, take a seat wherever you can. Stephen, what I want to do is give you a few minutes to set the scene here, and I believe we've got a short video as well that you want to play. Why don't you actually come to the podium, do your thing, and then we'll continue the conversation after that.
Great, thank you so much, Axel. It's a pleasure to see all of you again. I'll try not to be repetitive from my remarks of yesterday. I'll just begin by saying that copper is probably connected more closely to the global sustainable development agenda than any other metal or material. We could demonstrate that copper makes a positive impact on nearly all 17 of the UN SDGs. And we do that through partnerships. I mentioned yesterday United for Efficiency. Harry today spoke about the great work that's done with lighting. Well, we built off of lighting and we said, let's do the same thing with other products. So home appliances, industrial equipment, and we do that through United for Efficiency. I mentioned that we launched an off-grid initiative called CORE, the cornerstone of rural electrification, and I invite you to look up more information about U4E and CORE. But our most recent effort is called GEAR, Grid Efficiency and Resilience, and that aims to increase the supply of electricity to African consumers and businesses without increasing production. And I hope we have the video ready to go because it'll do a better job of explaining GEAR than I will. Technology is great when it works.
Africa stands at the threshold of an unprecedented period of growth in electricity demand, forecasted to be up 7-fold by 2040. In developed countries, total grid losses typically range between 7 and 10%. In Africa, these losses average between 15 and 30% and are as high as 44%. In simple terms, this means that for every 100 watts of electricity that's generated in Africa, as much as 44 watts never make it to the outlet in an African home or business.
We need to act now to make electricity grids more reliable, efficient and resilient. The Grid Efficiency and Resilience Initiative, known as GEAR, is unique in that it will provide free technical assistance and capacity building to all strategic stakeholders in the energy system. The IEA is proud to be part of the GEAR initiative and invites like-minded organisations to join us in putting people at the centre of Africa's clean energy transition. This is essential to the equitable social and economic development of the region.
GEAR adopts a holistic approach to tackle all critical issues and offers technical assistance and capacity building to create an enabling, regulatory and policy environment, to educate utility and non-utility players, reinforce local manufacturing capacities, while facilitating access to finance and the development of a new financing facility in partnership with Mission Efficiency.
In this context, efficiency, reliability, and resilience must be embedded in our existing and future grids, simply because every kilowatt hour counts. It is light for our youth to study, energy to produce our means of existence, and accelerate our economic and human development.
I am honored to be part of the GEAR initiative and support Africa's transition to efficient and resilient electricity grids. The development of Africa is a global challenge and is very dear to my heart.
It's urgent to act now. Join us.
I think that last bit, if you weren't able to read it, Bernard Lama is our ambassador. He's one of the greatest goalkeepers in football history. His nickname was the Cat. I encourage you to look him up. That's an appropriate nickname for him. So obviously doing a lot in the partnership space. And one last word on that. Harry yesterday mentioned that energy efficiency is half of the actions for the Paris Agreement. Investments in energy efficiency, though, are far lagging what the potential is for energy efficiency to help us to meet the Paris Agreement. So 2 weeks from today, we'll be in Copenhagen convening an energy efficiency charrette to bring together the finance community with the energy efficiency community and to try to get past that imbalance. Now, I've talked about how, through partnerships, the metal is making a positive impact on sustainable development. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the actions that the industry is taking. I could point to many case studies that our members are making. And forgive me, I wanted to go off script because this came across my Twitter feed about an hour ago. And it says, ICA members BHP, Rio Tinto, and Vale launched the Charge On Innovation Challenge to find solutions for charging technology to enable the electrification of mining vehicles. And apparently proposals received from more than 20 countries. The electrifying of the mining sector is critical, and Scope 3 is obviously a big challenge. So congratulations to that group for taking a stand on Scope 3 emissions. In terms of collective actions, in 2020 we launched something called the Copper Mark that ensures that copper is being produced responsibly 31 criteria, an independent organization, and today about 20% of global copper production is certified through the copper mark. I know there's still 80% to go, but in 2 years, I think quite a lot. When it comes to decarbonization, copper production accounts for 0.2% of non-agricultural emissions, and copper contributes to 2/3 of the solutions that will lead to decarbonization. But still, 0.2% may not sound like a lot. Maybe you could say it's just a drop in the ocean, but what is the ocean but a multitude of drops? So we're not ready to announce it today, but we are working on a decarbonization roadmap for the copper industry, so please stay tuned for that. We also recognize that the move towards a circular economy is critical, and we have designs to create a partnership that will work with governments to help them to put policies in place that will increase recycling rates. We'll also work with OEMs to design for sustainability. We heard from the fashion panel earlier just how important design for sustainability is. So we're doing our part on the SDGs through partnerships. We're doing our part to take care of our own house, so to speak, through responsible sourcing, decarbonization, and circularity. So with that in mind, and I mentioned this yesterday and I will repeat myself here, I think that there's a responsibility for governments to look at industries like mine more favorably. We are standing here willing partners to you. We have the solutions to help you to achieve your sustainable development goals to decarbonize. So, please work with us rather than working against us. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. Yeah, do take a seat. I want to open this up now into a panel discussion. And very important, that last point you made, we talk about collaboration. And we'll come back to that in just a second. Sonja, I want to start with you, though. The Secretary General brief focuses on transforming extractive industries for sustainable development. That's a quote. Why is it so timely for the UN to focus on extractive industries now?
I think it's quite important because the reality is the demand for certain minerals is definitely growing as we're accelerating the transition into the green economy. I mean, if you look at solar photovoltaic, if you look at wind farms, electric vehicles, the demands are really increasing for minerals. There was a scenario built by the IAEA, on what it would mean to transition and accelerate. And we saw that you needed 40% more of a demand, copper demand, 60 to 70% on lithium and nickel, and even 90% on lithium. So, it's really quite an increase in minerals when we move to these greener technologies, far more than the fossil fuel predecessors.
And what is the role, the role and the expectation of the UN system? We talked a little bit about this yesterday, but what is the role of the UN system in accelerating this shift to more sustainable, responsible mining? Tell us what the role is first, and tell us then whether you think the UN is fulfilling that role well enough.
The role is to ensure that as we act as the catalyst, as we spoke about yesterday, in getting to this cleaner energy transition in many forms, that we don't do it at the cost, the social cost and impacts of humanity. So the role is how to get that balance, which is an issue of policies, it's an issue of sharing knowledge, collaboration. So that's what I think the role is, because we don't want that in our rush to advance and get these technologies that we create, if I can say, new problems and new issues to the populations and societies where these minerals are being extracted.
Yeah, okay. Bruno, let me bring you in here, and I'm going to get to the standard on tailings management in just a second. But a broader comment from you, and I'd like the same from you too, John, in just a second. In terms of the sort of collaboration from private sector, policy, within the industry, across industry, woefully short is it falling now, do you think?
Concretizing what Stephen has already said, so if we look at the amount of raw material that we have used, 50 years ago, 30 gigatons, today 90 gigatons, in 50 years, 160 gigatons, 30, 90, 160. This is the basis, as Stephen said, it is the basis to create the world we want. It is the basis of the SDG implementation. So there is no way we will have to extract more material from the planet. On the other side, this extraction is producing more than half of the greenhouse gases impact. It is producing up to 80% of biodiversity losses. There is no way we continue in this way. So we are in the need of a sustainable mining industry and extractive industry. And when you see this needs to be implemented, to be realized in the next 50 years, what is nothing, this means that all actors have to work together.
Yeah.
The private sector has to take initiatives, the public space has to regulate it, the consumer has to make the adequate decisions when it comes to consumption.
But I guess my question is, how far have we come in terms of that collaboration? Well, we're clearly not seeing enough right now, but is it getting better? Since we last met 3-4 years ago in Nairobi, what has improved over those few years?
It's getting better. We are learning to work together. The game between private sector, public space, and consumer, it's working better. It is about having clearer vision, clearer understanding of the challenges and the potential solution, and it is about realizing the different roles that all these three parts I have in the game. It is not a confrontation between the public sector and the private space. It is a cooperation. It's a game of the parts, and this is we are getting better. Of course, we are far too slow.
No.
We will not get to the results in time if we not speed up.
I wonder sometimes, and John, I'm going to ask you in a similar question in a second, but I wonder whether sometimes a little bit of a confrontation is what is required, a little bit more naming and shaming to actually move this process on a little bit. Actually, John, before I come to you, Stephen, what do you think of that? Is that the wrong approach? Is that me with my journalist hat on trying to stir things up?
It's a fair question. I will say that I refer to ICA's members as the responsible stewards of the industry. We're the ones that are leading the charge on decarbonization, on responsible sourcing, on circularity, so that doesn't bother me at all when it comes to my members.
Okay.
But I think there is a role for that to push companies and industries along, sure. Someone said yesterday that there should be credentials to have a seat at the table, should be transparency.
Yeah.
And I support that, and my members support that, and we're getting there.
Okay, what do you think, John? I don't want to. You don't have to specifically answer the naming and shaming question, but the point that was made yesterday on credentials, transparency to get a seat at that table, I think maybe that's an important step.
Yeah, but I also think we should be conscious about that mining has a history with a lot of cowboys in it as well. It's been a bit of a free-for-all industry for a long time, and now that we're preparing for the sort of second super cycle for mining, because it's going to be a huge super cycle for mining companies now, we need to cleanse out the cowboys, and we need to have respectable, responsible people at the table who are prepared to do what we're doing with tailings, to set a global playing field, to get one regulatory framework, to cooperate with investors, with UNEP the way we've been doing. And it's time to grow up for the mining industry, basically.
But do you not, sorry to interrupt, do you not think what we've just mentioned, the need, the demand for transparency in order to get that seat at the table, do you not think that is enough to get these cowboys to work the way you need them to work?
I think looking at the mining industry, there's still a number of cowboys out there. And they really need to take a serious look at themselves in the mirror and decide who they want to be, because mining is moving really into the core center of everything when it comes to the transition. It's basically the new oil companies, and they're going to be scrutinized in a way they've never been scrutinized before. And we're living in a world with total transparency. Every mine site in the world will be scrutinized on all kinds of sustainability measurements, and they will need to stand up proud and be proud of what they're doing. And I think for many mining companies, that's a big challenge, to be honest.
John, you I guess, represent the investor perspective. You know, I mentioned here the Investor Mining and Tailings Safety Initiative, which you co-convene, I think I'm right in saying. Why, from an investor perspective, why is it important to green this sector and the tailing sector?
So I think unfortunately, and I'm not a big fan of divestment, on the contrary, I'm a true believer in engagement, but unfortunately, many responsible institutional investors have divested from the oil industry because of pressures onto climate. But that means they've moved into mining, and they're all expecting a super cycle. There's a huge expectation of a super cycle within mining, and there's going to be a super cycle within mining, a second super cycle again. Having said that, there's huge expectations on ESG. There's an ongoing discussion within the investment industry right now. Everybody's sort of become ESG aware the last few years, especially with Tesla skyrocketing.
Yeah. And are we allowed to use that acronym anymore, ESG?
Yeah,
especially with Tesla in mind.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, all of a sudden, and for me, having spent my life on this, I'm more than happy that we have this discussion. But having said that, there's, you know, the owners of the finance industry, you and I as individuals, we have a lot of expectations on the finance industry to take responsibility. So we can't leave the mining industry the way we've sort of left the oil industry. We have to engage. And once again, I think the pressures onto the mining industry is going to be huge. I think the copper mark that was raised by Stephen here is a perfect example. We're going to expect the sort of traceability through the value chain when it comes to green steel, copper, cobalt, all kinds of minerals in a way we haven't seen before. And it's going to transform the mining industry in my world.
Yeah. Bruno, the global industry standard on tailings management, you're a big part of that. Just talk us through, you know, very, very briefly, some of the principles of the standard, what the challenges are in implementing it, and how you think we can move on from that.
The standard is one brick in that wall, in that building that we are constructing of a sustainable extractive industry. The objective it is to reduce, in the ambition to zero, the impact of tailings on human life and on the environment. The transformative elements of this standard are a number. On one side, we have, creating the standard, we have integrated technical knowledge, social knowledge, economical knowledge into one standard that looks in a comprehensive way at all these elements. At the same time, we have integrated the management of the tailings facilities into the general management of the mining site. For a long time, tailings were considered a kind of externality, something outside, that it is not fully under the control and responsibility of the mining site top leadership. In some cases, people working in these tailings were prevented to have a normal career then in the mining industry. So integrating this into the mining site was very important. And the third element of change, it was that the standard was developed in a co-creational way with the different stakeholder groups, investor on one side, community on the other sides, and the industry as a third part, creating together, finding compromises all the way through. It was not easy, but it was at the end, it produced a standard that was more or less accepted from the first moment and was implemented for the first moment. There are challenges. The standards far to be perfect. In implementing the standard into the practice will be challenging. We don't have enough technical people. We need an institution that have an eye on how the standard further develop and is implemented. But these are challenging in every sector that we have to take and to solve.
Yeah, I saw you smiling, John. I know you want to come back on this one. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I think a key word, I'm totally for efficiency, but we need to talk about regulatory efficiency on a global basis. I think that's going to be a key word going forward. And back to the company comments on the great panel before us, there's too much noise, and we need to clarify expectations from the global community on every sector now. I think the cooperation we've done brilliantly with UNEP, with ICMM, to set this global standard that overrides all local standards or national standards. It's not perfect, but it sets the precedent for what we need to do in so many sectors and so many topics, because we're out of time. And people need to see results, otherwise they will lose trust in the processes that we represent. And I think this is a great example of what we can do when we cooperate together. So
yeah. I'm also being told in my ear that we're out of time, but there are a couple of other things I want to just get to you very, very quickly. Steve, in terms of technology, how far along are we in terms of being able to transition to a more circular economy in the mining industry?
You know, it's a challenge, especially for long life materials like copper, right? About 1/3 of demand today, copper demand, is met with recycled material. We would like to see that grow, and that's why we want to build a partnership to do that. The issue is that the lifetime for copper is typically 50 years, right? We're not going to disassemble buildings just to get at the wiring to feed that into the recycling loop, right? So it really comes down to policy, I think. You know, we just talked about how important it was to have a global regulation on tailings. You know, policy sets a level playing field, right? Yeah. Designing for sustainability, you know, I forget the number, it's 40 or 50 elements from the periodic table are in this phone. When this phone is done, how are we going to get those out of there? Yeah. It has to be economical, or it's not going to get done. So design for sustainability will at least make it more economical.
Let's get a final comment from each of you, a concluding thought, if you like, and maybe to prod you, we'll stay with the policy bit, because there seems to be a disgruntlement, you know, when it comes to talking about policy collaboration, policy support. I think I'm fair in saying that, Stephen. John, why don't you kick us off?
So I think finance can play an important role here, because once again, they're all trying to grapple with ESG and understanding the complexities of being responsible investors. And they will want that sort of global playing field. They will need sort of regulatory efficiency. And that will push countries to simplify, you know, the frameworks and the rule works. And you don't need to simplify them in a bad way. You can simplify them according to best practice. This is basically what we've been trying to do with the tailings standard. And we get a level playing field, and we need to push that process way ahead. And I think UNEP, the UN, these organizations that you see in front of it, is a perfect tool to get that done. So
okay, Sonja, let's hear your thoughts on that. Just on the back of what John's just said.
Yeah, well, you know, when John said the thing about cowboys earlier, I wanted to come back, because it really dawned on me that one thing we didn't talk about is the governance, the fragility of some of the governance societies and risks that we have in some of the areas where we have the extractives and the mineral actions taking place. And that's really a concern to us as we look at full sustainable development. So my final parting words is definitely we're going to be looking at the industries, the extractive industries and more to raise the bar higher. Good. Yeah, because at the end of the day, this is about people, planet, prosperity. Yep. And we ask for responsibility from supply chains, yep, to consumers, to communities, all levels of it. And, you know, I'm kind of thrilled to hear that there's a recognition of this, but yeah, we want more.
Yeah, but this bar raising needs to happen now,
yes,
right? It needed to happen yesterday.
Yes.
Okay, Bruno. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It works,
yep,
yes. I will make a comment from a macroeconomic perspective. If you see the costs of commodities in our global GDP, the part of commodities in our GDP, it's a very small fraction. So 1% of the global GDP, maybe 2%, depends how you count. So even if in implementing a sustainable mining and sourcing policy, we double the cost. It's huge. We are not talking about this, but even doubling the cost, at the end of the day, in the price of this micro, in the price of these lights, in the price of our clothes, how much it will make? 0 point whatever. We will not even remark that that the change was made, but it will be a huge contribution in terms of stability of our system, in reducing the risk of our economy. The key is, as Sonia was saying, it is level playing field, supporting weak economies, weak governance system, in keeping the same level globally on the planet, and we will get there.
Okay, very quick word, Steve.
Yeah, just a further word on the policy and the challenges, right?
And the disgruntlement.
Well, not disgruntlement. No. I support policy, and I think businesses want to understand what their expectations are. And when you have policies, it creates a level playing field, right? So the challenges are equal among companies. And it's important because just think about copper, and that's what I know about, I have to speak about. You know, our 30 members represent half of global production. There are 400 companies that report production, right? That means there's 370 roughly companies, more than 90% of the companies making up the other half. So policies are critical if you want to see action across that industry.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, look, I've got to stop it there, but and I appreciate that we've had to cut this a little bit short, but fascinating insights from all of you. Sonja, thank you to you. Bruno, John, and Steve, thank you very much.